Welcome to episode 605 of Salsidoparanormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, and tonight I'll be sharing true paranormal stories from the web. As always, you can find all episodes of the show, along with links to social media and other ways to contact me, at the podcast page, and that is salsidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions or accounts of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. Thank you all for listening, whether you are here for the live streams on Discord, or if you listen to the podcast or YouTube feeds, or on the Troubled Minds Radio Network, KUAP, Digital Broadcasting. There you can hear replays of 2 episodes of the show every night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, right before Troubled Minds Radio comes on. And as always, I want to thank Michael Strange, host of Troubled Minds Radio, for having me on the network and putting all my shows up there. If you'd like to support the show, there are some different ways to do that. You can always share the show with others and rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. You can find books I've written over on Amazon, paranormal fiction and nonfiction, with a new one coming out hopefully soon as possible. That will actually be connected to the podcast. We'll have material from the podcast in the book. You can also sign up for Patreon and get 2 extra episodes every week of true paranormal stories from the web. And that's for all paid membership level tier levels there. So, or you can just make one-time donations through PayPal. Support is never expected, but always appreciated, as there are expenses in making these shows, from equipment to research materials to travel expenses in some cases. So I believe that takes care of everything, and we can get on to these accounts here, these stories. So thank you all again for being here tonight, and looks like everything is working, so we'll keep going and hope that it is. Let's see here. So this first one says, my wife and I heard our son's bedroom door open and close while we were the only people at home watching TV in our bedroom. We looked at each other, finding it weird. A few months later, when our son was home alone, his bedroom door opened and slammed shut by itself. We had never told our son or anyone about our previous experience of hearing the door. I wonder if it could be some kind of memory or residual energy in the house. When our daughter was growing up in the same house, she had told us multiple times that the house was haunted, but we shrugged it off. These are the only paranormal experiences we've had, but I find it strange that my son also experienced the bedroom door opening and closing on its own. So the same thing basically there. Only that it sounds like he was there in person. I wonder now, because sounds they can kind of, you can hear them, but then find that nothing actually moved. So I'm wondering if that first time, if the parents, what did the door actually open and close that time, like the physical door that time, or did it not? And of course, since they weren't right there, it's hard to say. That just reminds me of experiences I had, and I've said this before, back at what used to be my aunt and uncle's house when my cousin and I were teenagers, late teenagers, and eventually is when it happened. And we'd be up in the second floor, and we'd hear doors on the ground floor opening and closing. And we'd go down there, and all the doors would be in the same position, and there'd be no cars in the driveway. We wouldn't hear any cars pulling up. And eventually we just got to the point where it happened so often we ignored it, which is probably not the safest thing to do. But I mean, nothing ever really happened there, so didn't feel too weird to do that. But But yeah, I just wonder, and it sounds like I would love to know, what the daughter experienced, or if it was just a sense, or what was going on there. Um, so yeah, sounds like maybe the house was, I don't know, maybe active, but it's hard to say without more details on what else the daughter experienced. If it was just those two events, it could be residual. Even with the door opening and closing, I wonder if that can also be residual objects being manipulated. If the Maybe if the energy is strong enough, maybe it can cause objects to be. It can affect objects. I don't. That's something I've never really looked into, but I'd be curious to find out about that. So yeah, that's the first one for tonight. Um, Moving on to the next one here. This one, let me see here. Okay. This one says, I was driving home after working the 3 to 11 shift, going through the city when there was with very little traffic. I was feeling sleepy and had the radio on loud. Suddenly, while I was stopped at a light, a green glowing orb about the size of a bowling ball appeared at the driver's side window. I heard a sound of rushing air as the orb moved, and it seemed to be looking at me, though no features were visible. After seemingly observing me, the orb flew away. I sat there trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. I am wondering how I can tell others about the experience without sounding crazy. It says that in quotation marks there. Um, yeah, that's a wild sighting. That's a good size orb, and um, it's not in your usual sort of surroundings. It's not like in a house or um, in the sky, or I mean, I guess it kind of is in the air, but it's not way up there. It's not in trees. Um, so I don't know what to make of that. But I mean, if the person felt like it was observing them, we have no idea for sure that it wasn't. And so I don't know, UFO in a way, somewhat, kind of, um, but also pretty low to the ground. I mean, driver's side window, so that's not, even if it's a bigger vehicle, that's not going to be too far off the ground, relatively speaking. It's not like it's up in the sky with airplanes. So yeah, sounds like a sighting of something. Moving on to the next one here. This one, let me see if I got the right spot. Yep, okay. This one says, I went to a coastal trail around 3 to 4 a.m. at night. So in the morning, basically. I was walking with music blasting through my headphones. The trail had trees and was paved, but the snow had snow that hadn't melted yet, as it was early spring in Alaska. I have heard many legends in Alaska, but I am not sure if this incident is related to any. While walking, I thought I heard humming despite wearing my headphones. Taking off the headphones, I heard what sounded like a woman humming. The sound seemed to be following me as I continued walking. I looked around with a flashlight, but saw no one. The humming stopped when I reached a more lit area, part of the trail. The darker area where this had happened felt eerie to me. After this experience, I started blessing myself and objects I bring for protection. And that's where that one ends. That's really odd that I'm thinking about now, because I've gotten a few of those. I found a few of those accounts of people hearing humming in different places. Um, And that's something fairly new, I feel like, as far as what I've found. It used to be it'd be more like just sounds of talking, but that I feel like that's like the third, maybe second or third, maybe fourth account of someone hearing humming that I found in the course of doing the show. Maybe more that I'm just not thinking of, but that seems like the number seems right. Um, and I don't know what that means, other than that maybe there's some kind of residual energy, or it's someone in another time, and somehow the times are overlapping. But all you're getting is sound. Who knows? It is odd though that the person there that had the experience could hear it with and without the headphones on, even though the headphones were blasting music. So does that make it more of sort of a psychic hearing in a way? I don't know, but yeah, that's a wild one. I've actually, I don't know, a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, I had an experience, just a really brief one, with a humming sound. It was one night, and late at night, early morning, whatever you want to call it, and I heard two sounds in my kitchen. First was just the sound of like like silverware um, tap the side of the sink like two or three times, and then maybe a few seconds later, I heard a man's voice humming again, just for maybe a second or two, and then it was gone. And I did get an eerie feeling just before all that happened, and then it faded away after it happened. But I wonder, now that I think about that, was someone just doing dishes? Was that someone, or even me from another time, just doing dishes? Even though I don't usually hum while I do dishes, so. But that's, I think that's possible. But also, who knows? I mean, it could have been. Um, then who knows what that was really? So I just know that I heard him in my kitchen. I was sitting right where I'm at now, and I have my kitchen has a half wall kind of window thing that looks into it or out of it, and it was right on the other side of the sink. Is actually, that's when I just realized that now. The sink is on the other side of the wall across from my computer, so I have electricity and running water right across from me, right in front of me. So anyway, maybe that makes it a hot spot. I don't know, but so yeah, I don't know about the humming, but that is not the first time I found accounts of experiences like that. I remember one I shared in the show a while ago about a woman that was sitting in the woods reading a book, and her husband was nearby um, fishing in a river, and she heard humming, the sound of a woman humming, coming closer and closer, and but of course she didn't see anything, and so she ended up getting up and leaving the area, and the husband hadn't heard anything, but she did, and I remember that from, I'm not sure what, that's must have been a month or so ago. I took 2 weeks off, so um, but yeah, so that's the first other experience, similar experience that I can think of that is similar in a way. But moving on to the next one here. Once I find my spot, okay. This one says, I work at a fast food restaurant and had just gotten off the night shift when this happened. There is a field parking area for employees, which I use to keep my car away from the main customer lot. After closing, I was walking to my car parked in the dark field area. There is a motion light at the entrance gate, but otherwise it was pitch black. As I walked to my car, I almost walked right into a dark mass, darker than the night itself. My body immediately reacted with raised hairs and a rush of static feeling came over me. The mass was roughly the size of a gorilla. I walked around the mass and hurried to my car. When the car headlights illuminated the area, there was nothing there except a small old paper cup. Nothing followed me home, but it was still an unsettling experience. I'm still curious as to what it was, though. Has anyone else had a similar experience? And that's where that one ends. That's a good-sized shadow for them to see and almost run into. I wonder if they just didn't see it at first or it appeared somehow. I don't know, but and then for it to be gone, that's not uncommon for these apparitions to just be gone as soon as they're hit with light. Not in every case, of course, but a lot of them. And yeah, I'm wondering about the history of that field. Not that that necessarily dictates what is going to happen there, but if it's an empty field, was there any buildings nearby? What's the history of the area, just in general? So yeah, I don't know, but it's amazing how many accounts of shadow figures or just weird shadows I come across. It's making me think of a recent episode of Trouble Minds that I was I called into and started talking about all that. And yeah, I'm always finding. I mean, sometimes I usually try to find a good 10 accounts of experience at a time, and I would say maybe 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 of them. The ones I find on average are about shadows. It's a really common thing. So I don't know what that means, but they're definitely out there, and they all seem to have different shapes and sizes and feelings attached to them or senses attached to them as far as if they feel good or bad or neutral, or even if they don't even seem aware of the person that they're nearby. All those things are all the variables, but the one common thing is shadows are seen where they don't make sense. So moving on to the next one here. Getting through these fairly quickly tonight. Good thing I have plenty. Let me see here. Had to scroll down. Okay. This one says, from the ages of 4 to 7 years old, I had 2 imaginary friends who were boys, which seems strange to me now, as I am a girl. This was around the time I moved to my current home, 14 years ago. As a young child, I was unaware of history, like the Civil War or Native American culture. The first imaginary friend was a 10-year-old boy wearing an accurate Confederate uniform. He was kind, and I talked to him in the car until leaving the neighborhood. The second imaginary friend appeared to be of Native American descent, around 11 years old. He wore traditional native clothing and had a stern personality. When I got in trouble, my mom recalls me trying to explain myself to this friend. I wonder if these imaginary, in quotation marks there, friends were actually imaginary. I live in a haunted city, though my house has no known history of death, but it was in a former hunting forest. There is a creek nearby that has made me feel what is it? That doesn't make sense. Made me feel scared when venturing there with friends. So that's the end of that one, and that's another thing that does pop up here and there. The idea that sometimes the imaginary friends that people have growing up are not necessarily imaginary. They could be possibly spirits or at least other entities out there. And yeah, that does pop up from time to time. And it sounds like this person had a pretty good image in their mind, at the very least, of these two figures. And sounds like they fit sort of the area that they were in, possibly as far as the history goes. Again, they're not really specific, which I understand. But yeah, it's I've heard of that before. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted because my cat Logan is snoring, so I'm hoping that's not coming through on the audio. But oh well, not much I can do about that. I think we can get through one more here before we stop for tonight. For this episode, I mean. Let's see here. Okay, this one says, this happened about 2 years ago when my son and I were home alone. My boyfriend was out of town in a different state for work. I was putting away laundry when I clearly heard my boyfriend's voice say, "Hey, you there?" At first, I brushed it off as just hearing things, which sometimes happens to me. However, my son then came running and asked if my boyfriend was back, because he had heard the voice too. This really freaked me out, since it was a full sentence, not just a name. This apartment only had one entry point, the front door, which was definitely locked. I cannot explain this experience, and still think about it often. We were completely alone in the apartment, with no way for my boyfriend to have actually been there and said those words. And that's where that one ends. There's two ways I think my mind goes with that, and there's one that seems less likely and one that seems more likely. Of course, everyone has probably heard, anyone that listens to these kinds of shows has heard of the idea of mimics, entities that seem to copy the appearance and the voice, sometimes one or the other, but sometimes both, of people. And sometimes they seem neutral, sometimes they seem negative. There's varying degrees of all that there. But the other thing, and this is what I wonder about more and more these days, is these other options of one, either some kind of a time anomaly where the boyfriend was there and it was his voice from a different time period, or also I will be curious to know if at the time this happened, was the boyfriend thinking of the writer here and her son? Was the boyfriend basically wondering how they were doing, and sort of just somehow, through however the mind works and the energy works, sort of sent out a message or a thought, and both the people there at the apartment heard it somehow? I don't think that's out of the question. So that's where my mind goes with that. And of course, that's something I would love to have the writer there ask their boyfriend. But yeah, that's a neat one, and I lean more towards that than anything else, because if nothing else ever happened there, then that's sort of where I would lean towards as far as a possible explanation. But yeah, so that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all in the next episode of Salsidoparanormal. Take care.